The older man sitting across my desk was weeping uncontrollably. He kept clasping his hands together, begging, "Madam, please approve this bailout loan. If you don't, the bank is going to take our house, our factory. My family will be out on the streets." I had my massive leather CEO chair turned around, staring silently out the glass window. He had absolutely no idea who he was begging for mercy. He had no clue he wasn't talking to just some ordinary CEO. Because the man crying behind me was none other than my own father. And as I listened to him beg, my mind drifted back to a night exactly 8 years ago. This exact same man had looked me dead in the eyes with a mocking smirk. I was just an 18-year-old girl then. I had worked myself to the bone to get accepted into my dream university. But the day before enrollment, I checked my bank account and found it completely empty. My own parents had secretly drained my entire $50,000 college fund. And do you know why? Because my older brother needed a luxury sports car to show off his status to his friends. When I broke down crying and confronted them, my father looked at my tear-stained face and said, "You're a girl. What do you need a fancy degree for? Go find a job as a cashier at a supermarket." I was physically thrown out of the house that very night. And today, exactly 8 years later, the same golden child brother they stole my future for ended up completely bankrupting their family business. With the bank threatening to seize everything, my arrogant parents were forced to walk into the city's largest investment firm to beg for a lifeline. They thought some kind, faceless CEO was going to save them. But when I finally spun my chair around to face them, and they realized that the cashier daughter they threw away was actually the owner of the entire company. Believe me, the way the color completely drained from their faces is a memory I will cherish for the rest of my life. I promise you, the ending of this video is going to give you absolute, pure satisfaction. So please, stay with me until the very end. Has your own family or someone close to you ever betrayed you this badly? Let me know in the comments. I promise I'll read and reply to every single one. And hey, if you're watching on YouTube, please show some love and subscribe to the channel. And if you're on Facebook, hit that follow button to stay by my side. So let's get right into it. Let me tell you how a stolen college fund birthed the greatest revenge of my entire life. Let me ask you a very honest question. Have you ever felt like you were born into the wrong family? Like you were just an unpaid extra in a movie that was entirely about someone else? Growing up, my house was totally divided. On one side, there was my older brother, Jason. Jason was the golden boy. If he sneezed, my parents bought him a new toy. If he got a C- on a math test, they hired him a $100 an hour private tutor and told him he was a genius. And then there was me. To my parents, I wasn't a daughter. I was a burden. I wore Jason's oversized hand-me-down clothes. I ate whatever they left on the stove, and I learned very early on that if I wanted absolutely anything in this life, I was going to have to get it myself. So that's exactly what I did. When I was 15 years old, I realized that education was my only ticket out of that toxic house. I wanted to go to one of the top business schools in the country, but I knew my parents wouldn't give me a single dime. So I started working. While my brother was out partying and crashing the cars my dad bought him, I was working double shifts at a greasy local diner. I would come home at midnight, smelling like old frying oil, and then I would sit at my tiny desk and study until 3 o'clock in the morning. I didn't go to prom. I didn't date. I didn't buy new clothes. Every single penny I made in tips, I deposited straight into my savings account. Because I was a minor when I opened it, my mother had to be listed as a joint account holder. But she never touched it, and honestly, I didn't think she even remembered it existed. For 3 brutal, exhausting years, I saved my money. I watched that account balance grow from $100 to $10,000 to eventually a staggering $50,000. That money wasn't just paper to me. It was my blood, my sweat, and my tears. It was my freedom. And then the miracle happened. In the spring of my senior year, I received a thick envelope in the mail. It was an acceptance letter from my dream university. I was in. I had actually done it. I remember sitting on my bed, holding that letter, crying tears of pure joy. I thought, I'm finally getting out of here. I'm finally going to start my real life. The deadline to pay the first year's tuition and secure my dorm room was on a Friday. I had everything perfectly planned out. On Thursday night, I sat down at my laptop in my dark bedroom. I was practically shaking with excitement. I opened my banking app, typed in my password, and pressed enter, ready to transfer the funds to the university. The screen loaded. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes, thinking the screen was glitching. My heart suddenly skipped a beat, and a cold, terrifying shiver ran down my spine. I refreshed the page. Available balance, $0. I couldn't breathe. My hands started trembling so violently that I dropped my mouse. $50,000. Gone. Every single shift at the diner, every sleepless night, every tip I had ever earned, vanished into thin air. At first, I panicked, thinking someone had hacked my account. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and frantically called the bank's 24-hour customer service line. Please, I begged the operator, tears streaming down my face. Please, someone stole my money. My account is completely empty. The woman on the phone typed on her keyboard for what felt like an eternity. Ma'am, she finally said, her voice completely calm. Your account wasn't hacked. The funds weren't stolen. What do you mean? I choked out. Where is it? The entire balance of $50,000 was legally withdrawn in person at one of our local branches this morning, the operator replied. It was withdrawn by the primary joint account holder. My blood ran completely cold. The phone slowly slipped out of my hand. It wasn't a hacker. It wasn't a thief. It was my mother. Have you ever experienced a betrayal so deep that your brain literally refuses to process it? I sat on my bedroom floor staring at the dropped phone, completely paralyzed. My mother. My own mother had walked into a bank, looked the teller in the eye, and drained 3 years of my blood, sweat, and tears into her own pockets. I don't even remember walking down the stairs. I felt like I was floating outside of my own body. My chest was heaving, and I was gasping for air. I was going to scream. I was going to tear the house apart until she gave me my money back. But as I reached the bottom of the staircase, I stopped. I heard a sound coming from outside. It was loud. It was the deep, aggressive, guttural roar of a high-performance car engine pulling into our driveway. And then I heard my parents. They were outside, laughing, cheering, clapping their hands. A sick, twisting feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. I slowly walked toward the front door, turned the brass handle, and pushed it open. I stepped out onto the front porch, and what I saw in our driveway is an image that is permanently burned into my retinas. Parked right in the middle of our driveway was a brand new, cherry red, luxury sports car. The headlights were glaring, the engine was purring, and the paint was so glossy it looked wet. The driver's side door swung open, and my older brother, Jason, stepped out. He was wearing his expensive designer clothes, a smug, arrogant grin plastered across his face. He tossed the keys in the air and caught them, looking like he had just won the lottery. My mother rushed forward and threw her arms around him, squealing with delight. "Oh, Jason, it's absolutely gorgeous! You deserve this! Sweetie!" My father was standing next to her, beaming with pride, patting my brother on the back. "Only the best for my son," he laughed loudly. I stood on the porch in the dark, shivering. My brain started doing the math. A down payment on a luxury sports car like that, with Jason's terrible credit history, would cost almost exactly $50,000 in cash. They didn't steal my college fund to pay for a medical emergency. They didn't steal it to save the family business from bankruptcy. They stole 3 years of my minimum wage diner shifts, my burnt hands, my sleepless nights, and my entire future, just to buy their golden child a toy. I didn't even realize I was moving until I was suddenly standing in the middle of the driveway. "Where is it?" I screamed. My voice was so loud and broken that it echoed down the entire street. My parents and my brother stopped laughing. They turned to look at me, their smiles dropping. "Emily, what is wrong with you?" my mother snapped, glaring at me like I was an annoying mosquito that had just ruined her perfect family photo. Stop screaming like a maniac. Your brother is celebrating. My money, I shrieked, tears violently streaming down my face. I pointed a trembling finger at the shiny red car. My account is empty! You went to the bank this morning and stole my college fund. Did you buy him that car with my tuition money? Jason leaned against the hood of his new car, crossing his arms. He didn't look guilty. He didn't look ashamed. He just rolled his eyes. God, you are so dramatic, Emily. It wasn't your money. Mom's name was on the account. I felt like I had been stabbed in the chest. I looked at my mother, desperately waiting for her to deny it, waiting for her to say it was a mistake. But she just adjusted her expensive shawl and looked at me with absolute, chilling indifference. Your brother is joining the executive board of your father's company next month, my mother said calmly, as if she were explaining math to a toddler. He is going to be meeting with high net worth clients. He cannot be seen driving around in a used sedan. He needed a car that reflects his status. But it was MY status, I cried out, my voice cracking into a pathetic sob. That was my future. My tuition is due tomorrow. If I don't pay, I lose my spot at the university. You ruined my life for a car. I took a step toward my mother, crying uncontrollably. But before I could even get close to her, my father stepped in between us. He didn't look like a father comforting his daughter. He looked down at me with a coldness that made my blood run to ice. And the words that came out of his mouth next were the exact words that would seal his ultimate destruction 8 years later. My father stepped in front of my mother, completely blocking my path. He towered over me in the dark driveway, the glowing headlights of Jason's new sports car casting long, harsh shadows across his face. Stop crying right now, my father barked, pointing a stiff finger at my chest. You are embarrassing yourself. I looked up at him, my vision blurred with hot tears. I couldn't believe what was happening. Dad, please, I begged, my voice breaking into a pathetic whimper. Please, I need that money. I worked so hard. If I don't pay the university by tomorrow, they are going to give my seat to someone else. My entire future will be gone. My father let out a harsh, dismissive scoff. He looked me up and down with absolute disgust. Your future? He repeated, a cruel, mocking smile spreading across his face. Emily, let's be realistic for a second. You are not executive material. You don't have Jason's charisma. You don't have the connections. What exactly are you going to do with a fancy, overpriced business degree anyway? I froze. My own father was standing in front of me, telling me I was completely worthless. Your brother is the heir to my company, my father continued, his voice echoing loudly in the cold night air. He needs that car to project power and success. That money went toward a real investment. An investment in this family's legacy? It was MY money, I screamed, stepping forward, completely blinded by rage and heartbreak. You are thieves! You stole from your own daughter! Before I could say another word, my father's hand shot out. He grabbed me tightly by the arm. His grip was so hard it actually hurt. Listen to me very carefully. You ungrateful little brat, my father snarled, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. I put a roof over your head. I fed you for 18 years. That money was compensation for everything this family has provided for you. You don't need a university degree. You're a girl. Go down to the local supermarket and find a job as a cashier. Because frankly, that's all you're ever going to be good for. A cashier. The words hit me like a physical blow to the head. 3 years of smelling like fry grease, burning my hands on hot plates, and staying awake until 3 a.m. studying. All of it reduced to nothing. To them, I was just a walking ATM to fund their golden child's luxury lifestyle. I want my money back, I whispered, my voice trembling but suddenly void of tears. Or I am calling the police tomorrow morning. The moment those words left my mouth, the atmosphere in the driveway completely shifted. My mother gasped. Jason stopped smirking, and my father's eyes went dead. If you ever threaten this family again, my father said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. "You will not sleep another night under my roof." "Then I guess I'm leaving," I replied, staring right back into his cold eyes. "Good," my father snapped. He let go of my arm and pointed toward the street. "Get out. Pack whatever you can carry and get off my property. And don't you dare come crawling back here when you realize how useless you are in the real world." He turned his back on me. My mother didn't say a word. She just linked her arm through my father's, and together they walked back inside the massive, warm house. Jason lingered for just a second. He pulled a $10 bill out of his pocket, crumpled it up, and threw it on the wet pavement at my feet. "Here," he laughed. "Buy yourself a bus ticket, Cashier." Then he got into his brand new sports car, revved the engine loudly, and drove it into the garage. I stood completely alone in the driveway. The night was freezing, and the wind was biting through my thin sweater. I looked down at the crumpled $10 bill on the ground. I didn't pick it up. I walked upstairs to my small, cold bedroom. I didn't pack my childhood memories. I didn't pack the expensive dresses my parents had bought me years ago. I just packed a single duffel bag with a few changes of clothes, my laptop, and my high school diploma. I walked down the grand staircase and out the front doors. I didn't look back. As I walked down the long, dark street, dragging my heavy bag behind me, the tears finally stopped. Something inside my chest completely broke that night. The naive, desperate little girl who just wanted her parents' love. She died in that driveway. And a very cold, very hungry survivor took her place. "A cashier," I whispered to the empty street. I made a promise to myself right then and there. I was going to build an empire so massive, so powerful, that one day, the great Richard Carter would be forced to bow his head to me. I just didn't realize it would take exactly 8 years for that promise to come true. For the next 8 years, I didn't exist to my family. And they didn't exist to me. I didn't call them on Thanksgiving. I didn't send a Christmas card. I completely, legally changed my last name so I wouldn't be associated with their toxic legacy. To the outside world, Emily Carter was completely dead. Let me tell you something about starting from absolute zero. It is terrifying, exhausting, and incredibly lonely. But there is a very specific type of fuel that burns inside you when the people who were supposed to protect you try to destroy you. It's called pure, unadulterated spite, and I had a limitless supply of it. I actually took my father's advice. Sort of. My first job after leaving that house was working the graveyard shift as a cashier at a 24-hour pharmacy. I stood behind a cheap plastic counter from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., ringing up groceries for pennies. Every time my feet ached, every time a customer yelled at me, I just closed my eyes and pictured my brother's smug face sitting in that red sports car. It was the best motivation I could have ever asked for. I took out massive student loans and enrolled in a local community college, transferring later to a top-tier university. I went to class during the day, worked as a cashier at night, and slept in 2-hour intervals in the library. I didn't party. I didn't date. I just worked. I graduated at the top of my class with a degree in finance. But I didn't want to just be an employee in a fancy corporate building. I wanted to be the one who owned the building. I started working as a junior analyst at a ruthless investment firm. I outworked everyone. I found loopholes in massive corporate mergers that seniors completely missed. I made the firm millions of dollars. Eventually, I took my bonus money, gathered a small group of aggressive, brilliant investors, and broke off to start my own private equity firm. We specialized in distressed assets, buying up failing companies, restructuring their toxic debt, and flipping them for massive profits. I built a reputation in the city as a shark, a woman who smiled warmly but negotiated with absolute, cold-blooded precision. By my 26th birthday, my firm was handling portfolios worth over $100 million. I had a penthouse overlooking the city. I wore custom-tailored power suits. I had a team of 50 executives answering to me. I had built the exact empire my father said a girl was incapable of building. But I never forgot where I came from. Every morning, When I sat at my massive mahogany desk, I had a custom-framed piece of paper sitting right next to my computer monitor. It wasn't my college degree. It wasn't my first $1 million check. It was a crumpled, faded $10 bill. The exact same $10 bill my brother had thrown at my feet in the driveway 8 years ago. I kept it there as a reminder that in the world of business, karma isn't just a spiritual concept. Karma is a mathematical certainty. If you make enough bad investments, the math will eventually catch up to you. And my family? They were the worst investment of all. While I was quietly building my empire in the shadows, my family was loud and arrogant in the spotlight. I kept tabs on them through private financial analysts. My father had officially handed over the operations of his family business to my brother, Jason. And it went exactly as you would expect. Jason didn't know how to run a company. He only knew how to spend its money. Within 3 years, he had drained the corporate accounts to fund his luxury vacations, designer clothes, and expensive habits. He took out massive, high-interest loans just to keep up the appearance of wealth. They were drowning. And then, exactly 8 years after they threw me out, the math finally caught up to them. It was a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my top-floor corner office, reviewing a list of newly distressed companies that local banks were trying to sell off. My chief financial officer walked into my office and placed a thick, red-tabbed folder on my desk. "Emily," he said, adjusting his glasses. "We just received a desperate application for a massive bailout loan. The company is completely bankrupt. The bank is foreclosing on their factory and their personal mansion by the end of the month." I didn't look up from my computer. "Why are you bringing this to me? We don't do charity bailouts for dead companies." "I know," my CFO replied, a slight smirk on his face. "But I saw the name of the CEO on the application. And considering your personal history, I thought you might want to look at this one yourself." I frowned. I slowly reached out, grabbed the red folder, and flipped it open. I stared at the name printed at the top of the desperate, pleading application. Carter Manufacturing. CEO, Richard Carter. I leaned back in my leather chair. A slow, dark, freezing smile spread across my face. I looked at the crumpled $10 bill sitting on my desk. The universe had just handed me the keys to my revenge on a silver platter. There is nothing quite as satisfying as reading the financial autopsy of people who thought they were untouchable. I spent the next 3 hours locked in my office, reading through every single page of the Carter family's loan application. And let me tell you, it was an absolute massacre. Jason, the golden boy, hadn't just mismanaged the company. He had completely butchered it. The reports showed that he had been pulling money from the company's payroll accounts just to cover the lease on his brand new sports cars and his luxury penthouse. When the suppliers stopped shipping materials because they weren't getting paid, the factory lines shut down. Instead of stepping in and fixing it, my father, who was too proud to admit his son was a failure, secretly mortgaged their family mansion twice just to keep the business floating for a few more months. It was a classic textbook case of ego destroying an empire. Now, the factory had zero production, the workers had walked out, and the bank had officially issued a notice of foreclosure on both the business and their personal home. They owed over $4 million in immediate, outstanding debt. They were bleeding out. And in their absolute panic, they had blindly sent a bailout application to my firm, Vanguard Equity Partners. Because I had legally changed my last name 8 years ago, and because I kept my personal life strictly out of the media, they had absolutely no idea that Vanguard Equity was owned and operated by the very daughter they had thrown into the street. To them, my company was just a massive, faceless financial savior. I closed the red folder and pressed the intercom button on my desk. "Sarah," I said to my executive assistant, "the Carter Manufacturing bailout application. I want you to call the numbers listed on the file. Tell Mr. Richard Carter that our senior partners have reviewed his application and are highly interested in discussing a full bailout package." "Right away, Emily," Sarah replied. "And Sarah?" I added, a cold edge creeping into my voice. "Tell them to come to the headquarters tomorrow at exactly 10 a.m. Tell them to bring the entire executive board, which means Jason and Mrs. Carter, must be present. Tell them we want to meet the whole family before we hand over the check. Understood. I'll make the call right now. I released the intercom button and stood up, walking over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. Somewhere in the city, inside a heavily mortgaged mansion, a phone was about to ring. And I knew exactly how my family was going to react. I could easily picture the scene. My father, pacing the floor, terrified of losing his status. Jason, sitting on the couch, sweating because he knew he was the one who ruined everything. My mother, crying because her wealthy friends had already started ignoring her calls. And then, the phone rings. My assistant tells them a massive, multi-million-dollar firm is ready to save them. I knew they were going to celebrate. I knew they were going to pop whatever cheap champagne they had left, completely convinced that their charm and their Carter family name had saved them once again. I knew my father was probably going to pat Jason on the back and say, "See? I told you everything would be fine." They genuinely believed they were walking into a room tomorrow to get a $4 million check handed to them on a silver platter. But they didn't know they weren't walking into a bank. They were walking into an execution. I turned away from the window, walked over to my desk, and picked up the crumpled $10 bill. I slipped it into the breast pocket of my custom-tailored blazer. Tomorrow morning, the great Richard Carter was going to walk into my building to beg for his life. And I was going to make sure he remembered exactly what a cashier looked like. The next morning, at exactly 9:45 a.m., my security desk called up to my penthouse office. "Miss CEO, your 10 a.m. appointments have arrived," the head of security announced. "A Mr. Richard Carter, Mrs. Carter, and a Jason Carter." "Thank you," I replied smoothly. "Have them wait in the main lobby for exactly 15 minutes. Then, escort them directly to the executive boardroom on the top floor. Do not tell them my name." "Understood, ma'am." I walked over to the security monitors on my wall and pulled up the live feed of the main lobby. There they were. 8 years had passed, but they looked exactly the same, only a little more desperate and a little more gray. My father was wearing a custom-tailored suit that looked slightly outdated. My mother was clutching a designer handbag, but I could tell from her rigid posture that she was terrified. And Jason? Jason looked like a little boy about to be scolded by the principal. He was sweating, nervously fixing his tie every few seconds. They were standing in the center of my massive, ultra-modern, glass and marble lobby. I watched as my father looked around at the towering pillars, the indoor waterfall, and the busy executives walking past them in sharp suits. He looked intimidated. He looked small. The great Richard Carter, who had spent his entire life making me feel like a peasant, was now standing in my building, completely mesmerized by the sheer scale of the wealth he was surrounded by. They had absolutely no idea that every single person walking past them worked for me. After exactly 15 minutes of letting them sweat in the lobby, my executive assistant, Sarah, walked up to them. I watched on the screen as she politely gestured toward the private VIP elevator. They stepped inside, the doors closed, and the elevator began its ascent to the 50th floor. I took a deep breath. I walked out of my private office and headed down the long, quiet hallway toward the executive boardroom. The boardroom was magnificent. It had a massive, polished mahogany table that could seat 30 people, surrounded by plush, black leather chairs. The entire back wall was made of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a breathtaking, panoramic view of the entire city skyline. I walked to the very head of the table. I pulled out the massive CEO chair. But I didn't sit facing the door. I spun the chair entirely around, so its high leather back was facing the entrance, and I sat down facing the glass windows. A few seconds later, I heard the heavy oak doors of the boardroom slowly creak open. "Right this way, please." Sarah's professional voice echoed in the room. "The CEO will be right with you. Please, take a seat." I heard the nervous shuffling of feet. I heard the sound of chairs being pulled out. I could feel the heavy, suffocating anxiety radiating off my family as they sat down at the opposite end of the long table. Sarah closed the heavy doors behind them, leaving us completely alone in the silent room. Nobody spoke, I could hear my father clear his throat nervously. I could hear Jason tapping his foot against the floor. I just sat there, looking out at the city, letting the silence stretch out. In high-stakes negotiations, silence is a weapon. The person who breaks the silence first is usually the person who is the most desperate. And right on cue, my father broke. "Excuse me," my father said. His voice wasn't booming and authoritative like it was 8 years ago. It was soft, respectful, pleading. "Good morning. I am Richard Carter. This is my wife and my son, Jason, the Vice President of Operations. We understand your firm is considering bailing out our manufacturing plant." I didn't move. I kept my back entirely to them. "Sir, or madam," my father continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I just want to say, we are incredibly grateful for this meeting. We know our financials look bad right now. We had some minor operational hiccups. But Carter Manufacturing has a 50-year legacy in this city. If you just give us this $4 million lifeline, I swear on my family's name, we will make your firm a massive return on investment. Please. If we don't get this loan today, the bank takes our home tomorrow." He actually sounded like he was going to cry. The arrogant patriarch, begging a faceless leather chair for his life. It was time. I placed my hands on the armrests, and very, very slowly, I spun the chair around, crossed my legs, and leaned back. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, staring directly down the long mahogany table at the 3 people who had ruined my youth. If I could have taken a photograph of my family's faces in that exact millisecond, I would have framed it and hung it next to that $10 bill forever. It was a masterpiece of pure, unadulterated horror. My father stopped breathing. His mouth actually fell open, and his eyes bulged so wide I thought they might pop out of his skull. The polite, begging smile on his face completely melted away, replaced by the look of a man who had just seen a ghost. My mother let out a sharp, high-pitched gasp. She physically recoiled, grabbing onto the armrest of her chair to keep from falling out of it. Jason just sat there, completely paralyzed, staring at me with a blank, idiotic expression. "Emily?" my father whispered. His voice was so weak, so broken, it barely made a sound in the massive boardroom. He looked around the luxurious room, staring at the expensive art and the glass walls, and then looked back at me, sitting at the head of the table. What are you doing here? Where is the CEO?" I slowly picked up a heavy, gold-plated pen from my desk and tapped it once against the polished wood. Click. "You're looking at her, Dad," I said softly. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a building. "No," Jason breathed out, shaking his head rapidly. "No, that's impossible. You don't own Vanguard equity. This firm manages hundreds of millions of dollars. You're a cashier! You work at a supermarket!" I let out a slow, dark laugh. The sound of it echoed in the room, making my mother flinch. "I'm just a cashier, Jason," I repeated, my voice slicing through the air like a knife. I stood up slowly from my massive leather chair. I wasn't the scared, crying 18-year-old girl in an oversized sweater anymore. I was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored, emerald green power suit. I walked around the massive table, my high heels clicking sharply in the terrifyingly quiet room until I was standing just a few feet away from them. 8 years ago, I said, looking dead into my father's terrified eyes, you stole $50,000 from my bank account. You bought your precious golden child a sports car so he could show off to his friends. And when I cried for my future, you told me I was a worthless girl who should go work at a supermarket. I stopped pacing and stood right behind Jason's chair. He stiffened, staring straight ahead, too terrified to even look up at me. "So, I took your advice, Dad," I whispered, my voice dropping to a dangerous, low hum. "I became a cashier. I worked the graveyard shift. I worked until my feet bled. I put myself through college. I built this firm from nothing, and I became the very thing you said I could never be." My mother started to cry. Real, ugly, panicked tears. Her hands were shaking violently in her lap. "Emily! Oh my God, Emily!" she sobbed, looking up at me. "We didn't know! I swear we didn't know this was your company! Please, you have to forgive us! We are your parents! We were wrong! We made a terrible mistake!" I snatched my gaze away from my father and looked down at her. "You didn't make a mistake, Mom," I said, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. "You made a choice. You chose a sports car over your daughter's education. You chose your son's ego over my life." I walked back to the head of the table. I picked up their thick, red-tabbed bailout application and held it up. "And now look at you," I said, staring at my father. The great, untouchable Richard Carter, sitting in my building, begging the cashier for $4 million to save his sinking ship. My father looked completely defeated. The arrogant patriarch was gone. He looked like an old, broken, pathetic man. "Emily, please," my father choked out, tears finally welling in his eyes. "The business, it's all we have left. Jason made some bad investments. The market turned on us. If you don't approve this loan, the bank is going to take the factory. They are going to foreclose on the house tomorrow morning. We will be on the street. We will have absolutely nothing." He looked at me with those desperate, pleading eyes, the eyes of a man begging for his life. "I will do anything," he whispered. "Please, just sign the loan." I looked at the three of them, stripped of their fake pride, their fake wealth, and their fake power. They were completely at my mercy. I sat back down in my CEO chair. I placed the red folder flat on the table, opened it, and pulled my gold pen out of my pocket. "I don't want your apologies, Dad," I said coldly. "I want to talk about the bank that's foreclosing on your house." My father stared at me, his brow furrowing in confusion. "The bank?" he stammered, frantically wiping a tear from his cheek. "What does the bank have to do with this? If you just sign the $4 million bailout loan, we can pay the bank off tomorrow morning. The foreclosure will stop, and we can keep the house." Jason finally found his voice. He leaned forward, forcing a pathetic, nervous smile onto his face. "Yeah, Emily, come on," Jason pleaded, trying to sound like the confident big brother he used to be. "We're family. I know we had our differences, but you're loaded now. $4 million is probably pocket change to you. Just write the check, and we'll put you on the board of directors. You'll own a piece of Carter Manufacturing." I stared at Jason. The absolute delusion of this man was staggering. He had literally run a 50-year-old manufacturing company straight into the ground, and he still thought his brand name was worth something to me. "I don't want a piece of Carter Manufacturing, Jason," I said softly, my voice dripping with ice. "Your company is a rotting corpse. You have zero inventory, zero reliable suppliers, and $3 million in unpaid vendor invoices. Your brand name is toxic." Jason's fake smile instantly vanished. He shrank back into his chair, his face turning bright red. My mother started hyperventilating again. "Then why did you call us here?" she cried, gripping the edge of the mahogany table. "If you're not going to give us the loan, why did you make us come all the way up here? Just to humiliate us? Just to rub your money in our faces?" "No, Mom," I replied, leaning forward and folding my hands on the desk. "I didn't call you here to rub my money in your faces. I called you here to explain exactly who you're dealing with." I pulled a single, heavily stamped legal document out of the red folder and slid it down the length of the polished table. It stopped right in front of my father. "Read the header on that document, Dad," I commanded. With shaking hands, my father picked up the paper. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the bold, black text at the top of the page. "Notice of asset transfer," my father read aloud, his voice trembling. He looked up at me, completely lost. "I don't understand. What is this?" "As you know," I began smoothly, "the bank that holds the mortgage on your factory and your personal mansion is First National Security Bank. They are a mid-sized regional bank. And recently, they were struggling with a lot of toxic, unpaid debt, mostly thanks to deadbeat clients like you." My father's face went completely pale. He realized where this was going, but his brain was desperately trying to deny it. When a bank has too much bad debt, I continued, they sell those bad loans to private equity firms for a fraction of the cost, just to get them off their books. I stood up, walking slowly around the table until I was standing directly behind my father's chair. 2 weeks ago, I whispered, leaning down right next to his ear, Vanguard Equity Partners purchased a massive portfolio of distressed assets from First National Security Bank. My mother let out a loud, terrified gasp. Jason buried his face in his hands. My father dropped the paper onto the table as if it had burned his fingers. You? You bought our debt? He choked out. I bought your mortgage, Dad, I replied, walking back to the head of the table. I bought the loan on your factory. I bought the loan on your house. You don't owe the bank $4 million anymore. You owe me. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. So, to answer your question, Mom, I said, looking directly at her horrified face, I didn't call you here to give you a bailout loan. You can't get a bailout loan from the exact same person who is currently foreclosing on your entire life. Emily, please, my father screamed, practically falling out of his chair as he lunged toward the table. You can't do this. You can't take the house. We will be on the street. We have nowhere to go. You are our daughter. You told me I wasn't your daughter 8 years ago. I fired back, my voice finally rising, filled with a decade of buried rage. You told me I was a worthless girl. You stole my college fund to buy a sports car, and you threw me out into the dark. I pointed a single, perfectly manicured finger toward the heavy oak doors of the boardroom. The foreclosure is finalized at 9 a.m. tomorrow, I said, my voice dropping back to a deadly, emotionless calm. You have exactly 24 hours to pack your bags and get out of my house, and get out of my factory. My father just stared at me. He was completely broken. There was no anger left in him, no pride, no arrogance. He just lowered his head and began to sob quietly into his hands. Oh, and Dad? I added softly, picking up the crumpled $10 bill from my desk. He slowly looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. I tossed the crumpled $10 bill across the table. It landed right on top of his legal paperwork. When you pack your things tomorrow, I whispered, take that. It should be just enough to buy you a bus ticket. I hear the local supermarket is hiring cashiers. Exactly 24 hours after they walked out of my boardroom, the Carter family was formally evicted from their mansion. I didn't go to watch them leave. I didn't need to. My legal team handled the transition, and the locks on the estate and the factory were changed before noon. In the world of high society, news of a bankruptcy travels faster than wildfire. The moment their foreclosure went public, all of their rich, powerful friends completely abandoned them. The country club revoked their membership. They went from being the untouchable elite of the city to the ultimate cautionary tale of fake wealth. With zero money in their bank accounts and absolutely no credit left, they had to downsize to a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment on the far outskirts of the city. I haven't spoken a single word to them since the day they sat in my office, and I never will. But there is one final, almost poetic piece to this story. A few months ago, I was driving through the outskirts of the city to check on a new commercial property my firm had just acquired. I stopped at a large, generic supermarket to grab a quick cup of coffee. I walked in, grabbed my coffee, and stood in line at the checkout counter. I was looking down at my phone, replying to an email, when I heard a familiar voice. That will be $3.50, ma'am. I slowly looked up. Standing behind the cheap plastic counter, wearing an ugly, oversized blue supermarket polo shirt, was my older brother, Jason. His hair was messy. There were dark bags under his eyes, and the smug, arrogant grin he used to wear was completely gone. He was bagging groceries. He didn't realize it was me until he looked up to take my money. When our eyes met, Jason physically froze. His hand hovered in the air, holding my coffee cup. He looked absolutely humiliated. He looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. I didn't say a word. I didn't laugh. I didn't mock him. I just pulled a crisp $10 bill out of my wallet, placed it on the counter, and gave him a soft, polite smile. "Keep the change," I said quietly. I took my coffee, turned around, and walked out of the store. As the sliding glass doors closed behind me, I felt a massive, heavy weight completely lift off my chest. Sometimes, karma isn't just a concept. Sometimes, karma has a very specific, undeniable sense of humor. They had stolen my future to buy a sports car. They had told me I was only good enough to be a cashier. And now, exactly 8 years later, the golden boy was scanning barcodes just to pay his rent. As for their massive mansion, I never moved into it. A house built on arrogance, favoritism, and stolen money could never be a real home to me. Every time I looked at those massive brick walls, all I saw was the driveway where my father told me I was completely worthless. But I didn't sell it, either. Instead, my private equity firm funded a massive, multi-million-dollar renovation project. We took the Carter family name off the heavy iron front gates and melted it down. We transformed the entire 15-acre estate into the Vanguard Scholarship Foundation, an educational center and housing facility for underprivileged girls. The very house that I was thrown out of for wanting an education is now fully funding the college tuitions of dozens of girls who have big dreams, but absolutely no money to pay for them. I watched my family's toxic legacy die, and I built something beautiful over its grave. Sometimes, the universe has to completely break your heart just to push you toward your true potential. Walking away from the people who share your blood is the most agonizing thing you will ever have to do. But sometimes, using their doubt as your fuel is the only way you will ever survive. If you are listening to my voice right now, and you've made it this far into the story, I want to say a massive, heartfelt thank you. You stood by me through the heartbreak, the stolen college fund, and the final revenge. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It helps this channel more than you can imagine. Make sure to subscribe if you're on YouTube, or hit that follow button if you're watching on Facebook, so you never miss another real-life story. And before you go, I have one final question for you. Tell me in the comments below. Do you think I went too far by taking their ancestral home, or did my family get exactly the karma they deserved? I'll be reading and replying to every single comment. Thank you for listening to my truth. Stay strong. Never let anyone tell you what you are capable of, and I'll see you in the next video.